Welcome back, everyone. We have indeed been able to gain a very, very significant level of information and in many cases been able to contribute to the thoughtful conversation that has taken place today. With that being said, at this moment I would like to turn the conversation over to the following speakers. First we have Dr. Ernest Morrell, and Dr. Morrell is a professor of arts and humanities and the director of the Institute for Urban and Minority Education right here at Teachers College, Columbia University. He is also Vice President of the National Council of Teachers of English. Please join me in giving him a round of applause. Additionally, I'd love to introduce, and feel honored to do so, teachers. We all know that teachers also make that magic happen in the classroom, right? I'd like to introduce Ms. Rachael Cooper. Ms. Rachael Cooper is a third grade teacher and literacy liaison at Thurgood Marshall Academy Lower School in New York City. She is also a teacher fellow with the Literacy Teachers Initiative project at Teachers College. Please join me in giving her a round of applause. Additionally, we have Ms. Danielle Delgado. Ms. Delgado is a 4th grade and 5th grade special education teacher at PS 125, the Ralph Bunche School, and a teacher fellow with the LTI project at Teachers College. And lastly, we have Dr. Jodene Morrell. Dr. Morrell is a senior research associate and affiliate of the Department of Curriculum and Teaching at Teachers College. She also directs the LTI project at Teachers College. You're on.
All right, good afternoon. All right, that's good. You have no excuse now. You just had a break, you got caffeine, got to stretch, whatever. As the first person who's spoken to you today from Teachers College, it's my privilege and honor to welcome you to this event. We're very happy to be able to co-sponsor this, and for those of you who stayed around, you're certainly in for a treat because in addition to myself, you're going to hear from teachers in the neighborhood here who work in the schools in Harlem that are using this curriculum and doing it every day. When zaner-bloser came to me in the Institute, as Sonia said, I also direct the Institute for Urban and Minority Education, with the idea for hosting this conference, I jumped at it for a couple of reasons, and I said this last night at our dinner to the speakers. We have some major issues that we're dealing with in education. 2 of the major issues we're dealing with are often talked about in silos. They're both important, but they're rarely ever put together. On the one hand, we talk a lot about the achievement gap, which I think is an erroneous term. What we have is an education gap, where certain groups of students in our country are not getting the kind of education that they deserve. So we have a space where we talk about those conversations. There's also a serious issue with millions of kids who are at school today who feel unsafe at the schools where they're attending, right? And that's a conversation that's in a separate silo. And in my career, my 20 years as an educator, I've tried to have both of those conversations together, right? How can we talk about the kind of empowering, engaging literacy education that students need in the context of making schools safer places, having schools with positive climates, having classrooms where students feel good about themselves and good about each other. That was one of the primary reasons that I decided to get involved with zaner-bloser 3 or 4 years ago in developing the Voices Literature and Writing program along with Bob and Catherine and Pat Walker and others that are in the room. Because I felt that we can't use the excuse of we're trying to improve literacy achievement to forget about social awareness and the development of social learning and helping kids to feel like actualized, empowered human beings with authentic voices in our classroom spaces. We need to do both of those things together. So hopefully you've been getting that a lot with a lot of meta-analyses and really important studies, and you're going to get it for the next 40 minutes in the classroom. What does this look like when 2 elementary school teachers are using literature and discussion and conversations to increase their students' academic literacy development and social awareness at the same time? So the title of our talk is How to Do That, Social Emotional Learning, Literacy Achievement, Positive Classroom Climates in 21st Century Schools. And I'm going to set the stage. I'm going to start with this last clause, the 21st century school. And why do we need to think about cultivating youth voices? Why do we need to think about this differently? What should literacy instruction look like today in schools today? And how can we connect that literacy instruction to a positive classroom climate? So, hold on before you laugh. It will get funny. But so this is a factory, right? You might recognize that. My kids will look at it and say, that's a classroom. Like, well, kind of. Because at the same time that America and other countries were becoming rapidly industrial and building factories, and people were moving from agricultural areas to cities or migrating from other countries to our cities, we realized that we needed to create a schooling system for these folks. Most people in human history prior to that had not had any formal education. They mostly worked very close to home, and only a very small selective elite or those that were entering the clergy were educated. But we realized all of a sudden, hey, we might have to educate everyone for the kind of society that we were beginning to create. So at that time, the thought of connecting education to employment was most people are going to be doing this for a living, right? Working in some kind of factory, where you didn't need to have a voice, where you kept your head down, where you only spoke when you were spoken to, right? And silence meant acquiescence, and silence meant being a good student. Following directions meant being a good student. It meant, at the time, being able to follow directions and read the directions that were given to you as a worker. And so you see how similar these two images look to one another, right? And that may have worked at the time, but the world is changing. Right? Not only is it changing in terms of how people work and how they relate to each other, but it's changing in the kind of social and emotional skills people need to be impactful at work, impactful in their civic life, and impactful in their social life. So you see the difference in these images. Folks are in circles, they're together, right? They have to learn how to speak. As Bob was saying, they have to develop strong voices, but also the capacity to listen, and to listen to those that don't necessarily look like them. Listen to those who may have different ideas from them, who may be generational difference, ideological differences. So this means an entirely different kind of conception of what the classroom should look like. But at the same time, I think that you've heard today, and you'll see in real practical examples in a moment, in preparing the students for the 21st century workforce, we can also prepare students to have the kind of social and emotional skills that they need to understand each other. It's not just about tolerance, it's about awareness. And I argue that that's a difference. And so we can do these things at the same time that we're adhering to Common Core, that we're raising standards. People want their kids to read and write in school, but they also don't want them to be picked on and feel bad about themselves. Right? I have 3 kids right now. 2 of them are in school, and I don't want them to be feeling like something is wrong with them, right? Or that they don't have the power to speak. And so the literacy curriculum can't dominate over that. But I argue that we can do the both and. I have really powerful literacy curricula that are preparing people for the 21st century. This is an extra, right? I can't remember now. There's been a lot of speakers. I think it was Ed who said it was the plate, right? This is the thing, right? Helping to develop authentic voices in young people is, I argue, the future of literacy curriculum. So, how do we create these positive learning communities? How do we create positive school climate? Unfortunately, even though the world has changed a lot in that 100 years between 1912 and 2013, the classrooms look remarkably similar, right? Same kind of competencies. One's in color, one's in black and white. But it's still all too common. Heads down. Stay focused. Don't speak unless you're spoken to, right? No wonder kids can't communicate on the playground because they're not communicating regularly in class and learning those skills, right? Even though we know they need them. So how do we do this, right? 3 essential questions form the core of this work that I've been doing for 20 years across the country, work that Jodene and the LTI teachers are doing that connect the social and emotional learning with the literacy. The first question, instead of thinking about how should we raise achievement, let's ask this question. How do we get kids excited about learning, right? Because one will lead to the other, that engagement. How do we get kids excited about learning? The second question, right? I argue that we do not have an ability crisis in American schools, but we do have an identity crisis. And that identity crisis leads to the negative school climates in many situations, right? If you are frustrated with how you feel about yourself as a student, as a reader, as a writer, you lash out, you take that on others. So how do we get kids to believe in themselves? That's another key question. Is there a definition of excellence for every student in America's classrooms? Is there a definition of achievement? Are there things that we can do to help kids to believe in themselves? Like, I belong in this place. I am attached to this place. People care about me in this place. I feel good about myself when I'm in this space. They spend 8 hours a day in this space. How would you like it if you had a job as adults where you didn't feel good about yourself for 8 hours a day, right? You would lash out. Think about a 7-year-old, right? How do we get kids to believe in themselves? The third question. Instead of thinking about what kind of education have we been trained to provide, we need to think about what kind of education will she need, right? This little child will likely live to see the 22nd century. Right? She doesn't need the education for 1912. What kind of world, what kind of demographic shifts, what kind of technological shifts, what kind of literacy tools does she need? What kind of understanding does she need in a world where Americans will only comprise 5% of the population? She's going to have to learn how to understand other people, right? So we have to think about that because we've been trained largely in that system that worked from 1912 to maybe 1962. But in 2012, we need to think much more about what our kids need from us than what we've been trained or what feels comfortable for us. So some of the key components to this approach that you will see in the teachers when they talk about what they're doing. You've heard a little bit of this before, but you cannot have an authentic learning space where kids are developing social and emotional learning if they are not also developing voice. Right? They're motivated to say things that we need to tap into. The question is, how do we help them know how to say what they want to say? You need to take perspective when you're thinking about how to couch what you want to say. If you disagree with someone, but you don't want to put them off, and you say, I understand what you're saying, but maybe we should look at it this way. That's a talent that will take you a long way. That's a talent that will build a classroom community. That's a talent that may stop fights. Right? How do we help kids to feel good about their ability to say what we want to say? What is this reader identity or writer identity or literate identity that's connected to this kind of voice? And how do we foster these kinds of identities? Right? I argue that that's one of the most important things we can do, is that every kid leaves our class with an identity as a reader, writer, and intellectual who has things to say and who cares about others enough to say it. Second tenet, that you can think about developing literacy and social awareness at the same time. And a bunch of people have said it in different ways. There's been all sorts of quotes that you can't teach the mind without the heart, and if there's not relationships, it's not going to be learning, and Comer and Aristotle, and they're all right. Right? If you are not forming secure attachments, if you do not feel attached, if you do not feel connected to that community, if you do not feel connected to the literary text, you cannot learn and you cannot develop the kind of social awareness. So what kind of attachments are we talking about? The kids need to develop. Attachments to the academic world. School is a place that I like to be. This classroom is a place that I like to be. Attachments to the literary world. Attachments to others in my classroom. And when you think about social awareness, attachments to the larger social world. And one of the things we're going to be arguing is that you can do this through the teaching of literature. You can do this through the teaching of informational text. And these, several of these texts come from read-alouds that are attached to the Voices curriculum that I think are really powerful platforms for doing that kind of stuff. How can we think about the teaching of literature and literacy and improving school climate? Right? These are some of the things that kind of come from this curriculum and others that are similar. The first thing I need to do that literature, especially a diverse literature of informational text and fictional text can do, is help me to understand myself better. Right? Why would I care? Someone used Roman oligarchy as an example. Why should I care about Roman oligarchy when no one has helped me understand how people got to my block? Right? Or help me to understand who I am in this day, in this age, in this neighborhood. Understanding myself and liking myself and knowing myself is a precursor to being able to understand others. Once I can understand myself and learn to understand others or take another's perspective, I can begin to like myself. I can begin to see myself as valuable. which is important to be able to see others as valuable. And then when I see myself as connected to these others, then we can have these larger conversations about understanding the social world or gaining a perspective of who I am in the world or why I should even care about this world enough to change it. Right? We can do these things in a Common Core curriculum, in an English class, in a social studies class, in a science class in a way that is rigorous, is developing deep comprehension skills, is developing writing skills, is developing college readiness, professional career, whatever. But most importantly, it's helping students to be whole people. And you need to be able to do that if you're going to be able to understand others. We think of school climate a lot of times as the absence of things, right? The absence of suspensions, the absence of disciplinary referrals. I see it as the presence of things. The presence of students who see themselves as intellectuals, the presence of students who see themselves as connected to community, the presence of educators who care about the students and tell them regularly that they care about them, the presence of people in the community that are connecting with the students, right? Those are the kinds of things that we need to build inside of our curriculum. This is not extracurricular things, right? We're going to talk about how you do this in the classroom, right? The real identities of students is formed from 8:30 to 2:30 in the classroom spaces. Right? So if we don't talk about those spaces, then we're missing the problem and we're missing the potential. Right? How do you build it into your curriculum? Okay, the last thing I'll say before turning it over to the teachers. Why should we be sold on this connection between looking at literacy and literacy instruction as improving school climate? A couple of things that you will see, that you've already seen in some of the examples that were shown. It's important, if you're going to have a healthy school climate, that students feel good about themselves at school and in your classrooms. Students feel good about the school, that they're happy to be at the school, that they feel good about each other, right? That it's not just me and my grades and my test scores, it's us. It's a we. We learn. We work together. We care about each other. One of my colleagues is sick with the flu in the 2nd grade. We have a lesser community until she gets back and she's healthy. Students talk to each other. Right? This is not intuitive. Right? We have to learn to speak with each other. There is a skill set with learning how to talk to one another and listen to one another. And these are things that I think that we can teach in our classrooms as literacy educators and as educators. Students experience success. I can't remember who the speaker was this morning who asked what the definitions of success were, and we talked about determination, grit, that sort of thing. We give our students a report card. If we were able to redefine the classroom community where success meant these same kinds of things, having a certain set of character traits, being able to get on well with each other, learning how to help others and be selfless, right? Every student would be able to experience that success. And finally, students have a purpose, right? That there are things that we do together in this space. So a positive school climate, positive classroom climates, communities where students are developing the deep comprehension that Catherine talked about, and the social and emotional learning skills that others have talked about, are possible. And what we're going to do now for the rest of the time is have a few teachers talk to you, right? Because we haven't heard from the teachers yet today, and they will tell you how they are using this curriculum, the kinds of gains that they're seeing their students make, and why it's important that we might need to think about what we do differently. Thank you.
Hello. So each year, as part of LTI, we think about topics we want to discuss in the classroom. Last year, I focused on multi-level questioning during guided reading. This year, I wanted to focus on the social and emotional well-being of 3rd graders. I decided on this research project because of some of my initial concerns that I had about my class in September. So one of my concerns was that some of my students didn't have an awareness of their bodies in space, and also the way that they spoke to each other, it wasn't very kind and it wasn't very nice. And I wondered if it was because of the way that they viewed themselves. I also, in just conversations with my class during social studies lessons and about Harlem, it just didn't seem that the students saw themselves as part of the community. And this was one of my concerns. Also, during the school year, I got new students with special needs into my classroom. And again, the students weren't getting along. And 2 of my students, in particular, weren't getting along. and one was complaining about being bullied. So parents were becoming involved, and I wanted to solve this problem. And I thought about ways that I could use literature to delve into these sensitive topics. So part of the LTI program is we work with Jodene, and we just talk about the research projects that we want to do. And she gave me several suggestions and books that I could use to create my unit. One book that I came up with on my own was Authors in the Classroom. And this is just an excellent book that gives practical lessons to raise students' self-awareness and self-esteem and empathy. And also Jodene suggested that I use My Secret Bully, No One Knew What to Do, Nobody Knew What to Do, and Bully. All of these books address the problem of bullying in schools. And students really loved these stories, and they were able to make so many connections to the stories. And it helped them because, especially Bully was such a good story because it really showed a story of a little boy that, that was being bullied by his classmate and just how embarrassing bullying can be. But it also showed how he problem solves. And so that was just such a great book. And it was really helpful. So we used these 3 books to create a unit, a 3-week unit on bullying. And this unit embedded many of the Common Core standards. So the final task at the end of our unit was students wrote a fictional narrative about a student being bullied and how they solved their problem. So these are all the Common Core standards that we used. And Jodene also suggested that we create a bullying journal, which was such a good idea because it was something that we were already doing in my school. And as part of our ELA curriculum, we write in a journal every day. And we devote 20 minutes a day to journaling. And so this really just fit right into our curriculum. So this journal helped to show students thoughts and reflections. And after each story, they wrote a response to literature. And they talked about the connections they made, the sex-to-sex connections, the sex-to-self connections, as well as text-to-world. And students were able to identify with the characters, and they really loved the stories. And it was just exciting to hear them get excited and just to have a lot of fun with the books. The children, these books really encouraged dialogue, and the students were able to say, oh, this character shouldn't do that, or this was wrong, or just certain things like that. So it was very good. So after reading the books and journaling, the children were able to have a concrete definition of bullying. So before the reading, a lot of the students thought bullying was just disagreements with each other, but now they were really able to explain that important difference between teasing and bullying. Students understand that bullying has specific behaviors, and they were able to identify victims of bullying. They learned from the literature to ask adults for advice and to solve their problems without violence. They were also able to discuss characters and the courage the characters showed in the stories, and they began to feel empowered, and all of a sudden they wanted to do different things with the books. So one of the things, and this is just an example of the T-chart that we created in their journal. Teasing, just to explain it, teasing is saying mean things, making fun of someone's appearance, laughing at someone when they get in trouble. While bullying is definitely, it can be verbal, but it's definitely more, it's pushing, hitting, hurting someone that's weaker than you. So after we finished the unit, again, as I said, the students were very excited, and they were mobilized, and they wanted to do something about bullying based on the books that they had read. And one of my students suggested that we start doing some role playing. And we did that, and we practiced it, and so I was able to videotape some of that. But even still, I wanted to help the students really be able to write a drama and create a drama. And our next unit of study in the Mastering the Standards unit is drama. And so we're going to really do that unit and practice that and help the students to really be able to write a drama of their own. Some other students also wanted to put posters around the school urging students not to bully. And I thought this was another great idea because they could write an opinion piece about bullying. And just finally, for me, I just wanted the students to have an enduring understanding that the actions that they make have a real impact on the school community, and that they're part of the school community. And that literature also just really can benefit students, and it can really give them a voice. So thank you.
Hello. I'm a 4th and 5th grade teacher at PS 125, and we're neighbors of TC at the Mouth Bunch School. And I'm also a part of the Literacy Teachers Initiative. This is my second year, and Jodene will talk a little more about that after me. When I started brainstorming for my next research project in the classroom, I knew I really wanted to improve my students' writing. So I wanted my students to feel comfortable and confident in the writing process rather than hate it wholeheartedly. And as a teacher with special needs, I also knew that my students had specific challenges that were unique to each and every one of them. So I wanted to ensure that I supported their individual needs as well. It was important for me to understand how my students felt about themselves as writers. So I wanted them to tell me what their needs were. I wanted to know what aspects of writing were difficult for them, and I wanted to know what they liked to write about. So it was also important for me to understand as well the social and emotional aspect of social and emotional needs of my students. And by finding this out, I could use it to cultivate my unit that I would begin with them. So I began my research by delving into exactly how my students felt about themselves as writers and what they would like to improve in their writing. So I asked them some of these questions. As a writer, what type of writing do you think produces your best work? As a writer, what gives you the most trouble? What would you like to improve? How do you decide what to write about? Where do your ideas come from? So in my results, I basically found out that a majority of my students enjoyed writing fictional narratives with their own types of made-up stories and characters, and they enjoyed the least writing nonfiction text or writing responses to nonfiction text. And my students were aware that they had challenges with the writing process, such as planning and revising. They had trouble with getting an introduction that hooked their audience. And although it was good that they recognized these challenges, it was a little sad to read the responses and the frustration in their responses about writing. So while conferencing with Dr. Morrell, I felt that bullying was an important topic to address with my students. I wanted them to be able to express their thoughts and feelings about bullying through writing. I also wanted to keep that focus on the social and emotional needs of my students and include discussions on community within the classroom and school, as well as their feelings of self-worth. So when I conducted individual conferences with my students, I made some very poignant discoveries. Students felt that within the confines of my classroom, they felt safe and secure and they felt like they belonged. And they said that I made them feel comfortable to be in the room and felt comfortable speaking during class discussions. So that, of course, made me happy. And it made me feel good to know that I created that environment for them. However, a few of my students felt like once outside of the classroom, they felt lonely and they didn't feel comfortable. And that at times they felt pressure from other students in other classrooms and pressure to be something that they weren't. They also felt that they were being made fun of, especially during recess and during lunch in the cafeteria. While conferencing with one particular student, I had asked her to talk a little more in depth about her bullying experience, and she completely shut down. She said it was her business and she didn't want anyone knowing her business. And this really confused me because this particular student was always very comfortable coming up and talking to me. She's talked about numerous issues she was dealing with in her life. So why was a child that was so outspoken and extroverted, who had shared so many of her life stories with me, suddenly resistant to sharing a bullying experience? So I knew at this moment that bullying would be a very important topic to discuss in my class. So while conferencing with Dr. Morrell, she suggested books from the zaner-bloser unit on bullying, which proved to be very useful with my unit. The books in the zaner-bloser unit were wonderful. They posed situations that were realistic and could happen to any elementary school level child. My students really truly enjoyed listening to these books, and they were very engaged. The book that made the most impact on my students was My Secret Bully by Trudy Ludwig. As I finished reading My Secret Bully, I closed the book, I set it down on the table in front of my students, and I heard my once resistant student say, "I never realized that now I think I have a secret bully as well." Another student at the table had also come to realize that someone who they thought was their friend may, in fact, be a secret bully. It was a very compelling moment in my class, and discussions about traits of what a secret bully are started to continue. Discussions of their experiences carried on for another 20 minutes, and It wasn't expected because I had only allotted 30 minutes for my lesson, but I let it happen. And that is such a very important point to make here. It's okay for us teachers to let good discussions happen in our classroom, even if it lets your lesson run over. The conversations that my students were having were worth so much more than my strictly timed lesson. So we as teachers need to allow for these moments to happen in our classrooms. We cannot always get bogged down on the time constraints. When good conversation is happening, you're creating a community of learners where students feel free to express their feelings and thoughts, and this is where good writing streams from. No time constraints are truly worth losing that over. So that being said, I also wanted to ensure that I was incorporating the Common Core state standards into my lesson. So I decided that I would have my students write persuasive essays about a particular topic of bullying. So some of these examples were, should schools implement an anti-bullying program? Are the programs effective? How does bullying affect a child? Should bullies be expelled from schools? While we were during the persuasive writing process, we utilized different forms of technology and sources and skills, and the students learned how to pull factual information on their topic from credible websites. And they also pulled different articles from the newspaper about bullying and stories about children that have been bullied. And this gave my students an opportunity to be immersed in the complex text and pull information from them in order to back up their opinions in their persuasive writing. So going along with my long-term research and with the LTI project, I'm also utilizing voice recorders with my students in the editing process. I want to see if some of my auditory learners could benefit from reading into the voice recorders and then writing it down verbatim what they hear back. Another way I'm using them is to read back their writing and then edit their work as they listen back. So hearing their work read aloud has actually proved to be very helpful for my auditory learners. Another skill that I also implemented was the tag model. Tell the writer something you like, ask the writer a question, and give the writer suggestions. And we use this in the pure editing process. So my findings that came from my unit on bullying was that it opened up my class in a way that it never had before. I now have students who actively participate in class discussions, students who at one time didn't open up about their feelings, and they now feel like this burden's been lifted off of them, and now they can be proactive, working on their own mediating. One of my students wanted to become a peer mediator, and she's now working with the school counselor as a peer mediator for the younger students. And that was my once resistant student. As a class, we know our room is a judgment-free zone. Anything discussed is done in confidence, and we as a community of learners, we know that we support each other. My students are not afraid to show their work to a fellow student when editing. Students are comfortable bringing their own knowledge and experience to class discussions. And in turn, this creates the 21st century learner that we're striving for our students to be. They are actively involved in their own paths to success, and the writing shows. As teachers, we recognize that we have a lot of work to complete in our rooms. We have many responsibilities, and we're very stressed at times. But I am proof that if you take the time out to address your students' social and emotional needs, you're going to see changes in your students.
I see that we're a little short on time, which is fine. One of the benefits of going last at the end of a summit like this is that most of what you're going to say has already been said. So, which is good. We're all on the same page, right? So I wanted to reiterate some of the points that have already been made. I'm borrowing from Jonathan Cohen, who is the co-founder and president of the National School Climate Center. And he argues very briefly that we need to reframe education. We are very much focused on literacy, mathematics, which of course children need this in order to be successful. But he argues that what is lacking is this attention on social, emotional, and ethical competencies. And the reason I invited our two teachers, which really I could have invited any of our teacher fellows, they were very much focused on bullying, so it fit well. But I would argue that we have teachers who are doing this. For some reason, the media likes to focus on the negative things that are happening in school. I despise AOL News, right? Because I know that there are wonderful things happening. However, as a whole, we certainly do need to focus on how do we meet those social, emotional learning skills so that our children are prepared to be effective within their communities, to see themselves positively as well. So I'm sure we've heard today that there's a lot of pressures on teachers, but we shouldn't see teaching social and emotional learning as something on top of what we need to do in the day. But I think our two teachers show how it can be embedded right into the curriculum, drawing on great literacy or great literature and embedding that into the writing. And really, it's even more than supplementing. It becomes part of what you do in your classroom every day within your lessons. So why focus on literature? And I do a lot of, I guess you could say, research in particular areas. And so when I did this search, I put in the keywords bullying and literature. Most of what came up, articles, books, chapters, were focused on middle school, which makes sense. When you think about young adult literature, a lot of it is coming of age, it's young adults struggling with different issues, bullying is a big one. And I thought, well, maybe we need to think more about literature for younger children, which is why I was thrilled to use the zaner-bloser books, because it fits so well with what the teachers are thinking about, that using that literature to put the focus on a character, even though it might be happening within your classroom, there's a little bit of healthy distance so that kids can talk about what this character did instead of what this child sitting next to me did. And so it creates a safer space for discussion. And kids know, they know what you're talking about when you're talking about a particular character. And that's a wonderful way to resolve any issues that might be happening in the classroom around bullying. And so we're also thinking about the standards. And yes, there's more emphasis on informational text, but it doesn't mean that we're throwing out the literature. And I think that's one concern that some teachers have, that maybe we need to move far from the literature, which is not what the standards are saying. And I think it's critical that we ensure that this remains in our classrooms and something that teachers can draw on. I'm very much preaching to the choir right now, so if you feel like yelling amen, please do. A lot of the SEL research that I found when I did yet another, research search, was that we're very focused on the youngest learners. And so we want to know that our pre-K, our little ones, are coming in with those social skills, learning how to, what we think about doing school, how to get along with one another, how to feel good about it. They need those social, emotional skills, even as they get older. And we also know that parents tend to step back a little more as kids go through school. And that's, I wouldn't say they need it more, but they need it just as much as they're getting older. And so we want to make sure, again, that we have that good literature, we have teachers that are mindful of the type of skills that their kids need in order to be healthy, productive individuals. I'm drawing from two quotes that were really profound. This comes out of the Interdisciplinary Group on Preventing School and Community Violence. It is a statement put forth, it's their position statement that came out in December following the Sandy Hook shooting, which is the 1-month anniversary. I typically don't read from slides, but I'll just read one here. Connectedness refers to what binds us together as families, friends, and communities. All students need to feel that they belong at their school and that others care for them. And I believe the superintendent of Cleveland pointed that out. The student that shot the teachers, it wasn't because of the type of bullying that we think of, it was because of isolation. And at one point, Rachael and I had talked about, is there really bullying happening? Are you seeing it? Sort of, it's more about teasing. And we said, but even if there's one child, that this is helping them to think about how can I help others, how can I help me, maybe family member, it's important work, it matters. And finally, I told you I could move fast, right? Here we go, this is our last slide. So I wanted to tell you just a little bit more about the Literacy Teachers Initiative Project. This is a partnership with IUME and Community School District 5, and which you heard Ms. Gail Reeves speaking earlier, the superintendent that we're partnering with. And we have 9 teacher fellows in our local schools. And what we're doing is we meet very regularly. It works out to be about every other week. And we start off by talking about what are some of the issues and challenges that you're seeing in your classroom. We design collaborative action research. We pour resources into the school, support, and they do the research. And what's powerful is that they then have an opportunity to speak to you in settings such as this, local conferences, national conferences, and these are our teachers. I want to connect faces with the teachers that are doing great work in our schools. So of course we have Rachael and Danielle. We also have Ms. Trisha Gordon, if you can raise your hand right there. And we also have our doctoral student, Kelly Johnston, who's doing great work to support our teachers. I want to leave you with one last thought. Kirk Smalley had mentioned this, that it really comes down to what we're doing in the classrooms. And to sound very cliche, I mean to, we can make a difference in the world as teachers. We can love our children, we can change. Who knows the one thing that we might say to a child, a book that we might read to them that helps them to love themselves and to know that they are in a safe, loving environment. Thank you.
Oh, come on, we're in their house. Let's do better than that.